This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/freelancers show.
Hello and welcome to the Freelancers Show. I'm Jonathan Stark, and today I am joined by panelist Philip Morgan.
Jonathan, hey, how you doing, man?
Welcome back from your sabbatical.
Thank you.
Happy to have you. And today our topic is positioning before lead generation. So deciding what your positioning is before you try to start generating leads. I love this topic.
Mm-hmm. I think we should start. Should we go for the jugular and start talking about why the order of these two activities matters?
Should we define them first?
Get out. Yeah, let's do that first.
Let's make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll go for the jugular.
You know, a while back, you and I on this very show had a really good conversation that helped clarify my thinking about positioning, because I think I'd been guilty of using it in a kind of sloppy way. So under the umbrella of defining some of these terms, I'll say positioning is like grammatically, that's a verb. The way that we all kind of tend to use it is like, I'm positioning my business, or I'm going, I'm finally tackling the positioning question. And it's expressed as a verb, but really, I think the outcome of our conversation and what I've really settled on since then is that it's a thing. It's a noun. It's not a verb. And I know that's kind of arcane, but to try to make it less arcane, you have a market position. If you're providing services or selling a product, you have a market position, and that position is how you are thought of by the people in the market. That's really what a position is how do they think of you? Mm-hmm. Do they think of Jonathan Stark as some guy who provides services that are dirt cheap or expensive and worth it? And, why would you, hire Jonathan to help you? And those are all the components of a market position. Right.
Like for JetBlue, it's like, they're like they're like United, but they treat you like a human being.
United without the violence.
Right. So it's like that. It's like the way somebody would recommend you to someone else. Like, what's that one simple? They're not going to pull out a PowerPoint slide to recommend you to someone else. They're going to say, hey, he's a mobile consultant. He's expensive, but he's worth it. Something like that.
Yeah. If you thought of your market position as the one sentence by which people remember you, that's maybe about the most functional, best definition you could come up with for what is positioning.
Right.
But there's this other element to it, and the fact that we sort of cast that word as a verb is meaningful, because we all acknowledge it's a process, right? It's a change over time. So you're trying to get to that point where enough people think of you in the way you want to be thought of. That's sort of like success in positioning, is when you're at that stage in the process where enough people think of you in the way you want to be thought of. And the way we get there is specializing, most of us. Mm-hmm. The way Fortune 500 companies get there is advertising and marketing spend.
Yeah.
And I mean, making key decisions, of course, but also supporting that with a ton of marketing spend. That's how they get there. How we get there is we specialize in something.
Yeah, so, you narrow down we don't have, like, people like us don't have the resources to throw $1 billion into a marketing budget like Samsung does. We need to kind of narrow down onto something where we can actually own that thing, own that space, and not do just like global brand advertising to make people think an S8 or whatever we're up to is cool.
Yep. And I would say we earn that position by specializing. So, like, if how you want to be thought of is some kind of expert or some kind of person who can really be effective at problem solving in a certain way, or it's just really amazing at what they do. Like if that's your aspiration, on the one hand, you can want that, that's fine, but you got to kind of have to earn it too. You have to be able to like produce those results, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the best way
I do think, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I think for all practical purposes for this audience, that's true, but I think it can happen that you get a de facto, you for some reason, you become positioned in people's minds because of for something that happened to you or whatever. But in terms of taking control, I think that's the only way it's the most effective, quickest path to getting to owning that position in the potential client's minds is to specialize in something, to focus down and be good at delivering a particular kind of result. Yeah, that's true. Positioning can happen to you, and I think that's really what people mean when they say I got pigeonholed. Gripe. I'm a DBA, and really I want to be a back-end developer. Yeah, pigeonhole yourself. You want to pigeonhole yourself, not have someone else do it to you. Boom. Yeah. So there's this element of like intentionality to the process. It is making a decision saying, well, this is what I want. I don't want just whatever comes my way. I want a certain type of opportunity to come my way. Or I want to work with a certain type of client, or I just want to be around a certain type of people. And the best way to do that is to be known for X. And so, yeah, that's another part of it. You're absolutely right. Is that intentionality about it. So, yeah, all that is, that's a kind of, we're hitting it from different angles, but those are maybe part of defining the idea of positioning or specialization. Yes. Okay. So let me throw it on you. Yep. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Were you going to take us in an interesting direction? No, not yet. I was just going to switch to lead generation, but yeah, go ahead. Well, I wanted to say, now who's asking the questions, Jonathan? How would you define lead generation? Lead generation would be, how would I define it? It would be marketing activities intended to increase the number of conversations you were having with potential clients. So that was pretty vague, and I already forgot what I said, but well, increasing the number of conversations, I think that's one of the bigger facets of it. I've got some others I'll throw in, but keep going with that. Yeah, it's words like funnel and pipeline, or I don't want to go straight to the jargon, but the idea is, you've got some message to get out that you hope is going to be attractive to people who want to exchange money for your product or service. So there's like a million ways to do that. Everything from buying a Super Bowl ad to appearing as a guest on podcasts to, buying Facebook ads or blogging or running a mailing list or going to meetups and speaking at conferences, writing a book, which is a product technically, but I think depending on your strategy, it could really be more of a marketing piece than a product. So there's so many tactics, and you can't swing a dead cat online without somebody yelling in your face about what tactics you should be using. Right. And there are a million of them, and probably every single one of them has worked for someone, but it doesn't mean they're going to work for you, dear listener, because if you just in general, this is a general truism, I think, beyond even marketing or freelancers or soloists or firms, even up at the Fortune 500 level, engaging in tactics in absence of a strategy is almost certainly a waste of time, because you don't know which tactics to pick. And there's an endless list of tactics that you could pick to get the word out or attract clients. Or, you could do outreach. I didn't even mention outreach. You could just be sending cold emails to people or calling them on the phone. All of these things are lead generation activities. But if you don't have a strategy in place, and in this case, the positioning would kind of stand in for the strategy. It's kind of like the thing that you stand for, or the result that you can deliver. Then doing all of that other stuff in absence of that is, as our good friend Kai Davis says, moving 1 inch in every direction. Yeah. You're just pulling against yourself. Yeah, there's trying to put together two threads here. I got distracted by something I'm going to say later. Let's talk about trust, because I think that's another facet of lead generation. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. So what's the? Because I wouldn't say that. I would say trust is more a factor. I would say trust comes into play farther down the funnel. Right. So
That's good that we have at least some difference in how we see things, because I've agreed with everything thus far.
That's pretty boring.
That'll make it more interesting for the listeners. So I think that, so lead generation, this is not a different definition than one you gave. It's just different words. I don't think it's meaningfully different, but I think if I had said, okay, Philip, how do you define lead generation? I would have said something like it's connecting with and building trust with prospective clients. I think there's a broader view of lead generation, like getting contact information is another way you could define it. Like someone willingly submits contact information, like an email address, or fills out a form saying, I'd like to talk to you. Those all fit under the umbrella of lead generation. But anytime that I come up with a definition, I think you and I have this in common. We're trying to get to like, what's the essence of that thing?
Yeah.
Not what's an accurate description of some aspect of it, but what's like the core thing about it.
Yeah, that's true. It comes down to the definition of what's a lead, like how qualified is a lead. That's right. Where the trust, that's why my disconnect with trust. It's like, oh, that's funny.
Well,
okay.
And I'm not doing it from like a game playing perspective, but when I think about some of the language that's on my website, so if you go to philipmorganconsulting.com, right at the top of the homepage, there's a big opt-in for an email course. And the headline on that opt-in says, if you got fewer than 10 leads or if your dev shop got fewer than 10 leads last week, you need to take this free email course. And I'm not like being disingenuous, but I am using a certain definition of lead that is not the way I'm defining a lead there is anybody who signs up to an email list, or anybody who for any reason gives you permission to reach out to them. And that's a less stringent definition than I just used a few minutes ago, where I said it's connecting with and building trust with prospective clients. That's a sort of more stringent definition, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, not that to me, one is not the most correct versus the other. It's just, it's a thing to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is a lead? Like when you start thinking about it like a funnel, then it kind of changes as it progresses through the funnel.
Yeah, I put up a student glossary probably 2 years ago, and there were a lot of terms on it that I wanted to define in a hyper-specific way that wasn't necessarily relevant to general usage of the terms, but within the coaching program, I wanted very important. There are keywords that need to be defined very clearly. Things like cost, value, and price, not the same thing. People use them interchangeably all the time in the real world, but we can't even have a conversation. Students and I can't even have a conversation unless we know exactly what those words mean. And one of the ones, the only one that I feel was never resolved for me was the difference between a lead and a prospect, because and I just picked a way to use it. And the reason why is because I couldn't find any authoritative source that didn't flip-flop these two things. I keep finding authoritative sources who literally used them opposite the way I thought that they were, or the way I thought they were. So like, which one comes first in the funnel? It kind of doesn't matter. What we're talking about, like on your website, the call to action, how many leads did you get? It's like, for somebody like who you're talking to, that means emails. Like pretty much that means somebody reaching out to them through their website to be like, hey, or someone recommended them, and they get an email in their inbox that says, hey, we understand that you do WordPress sites. We'd like to talk to you because we need a WordPress site. Like mostly right. Everybody I talk to, that's what they think a lead is.
Yeah, I think that might be for now a good enough way to resolve. But I mean, you put your finger on something huge. Like, just know that when you see somebody talking about leads, there's a 50% chance they don't mean the same thing when they say that word as you do.
Right.
And you need more context around what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'll find counterexamples. I've always thought of leads as that's when someone raises their hand and says, I might be interested in your services. And then they become a prospect when you've started to have a sales conversation and they start to become qualified in some way.
Right. That's how I see it. No, that's kind of how I see it too. But I think my lead, I don't, the raising hand part is not, is optional for me. So, and I think this is true for traditional type salespeople. I think, the traditional salespeople say a prospect is someone who fits my customer avatar. It's a prospect. It's prospect, like they're prospecting, like mining for gold. Where you and I, in normal use prospect as someone who's call it a likely customer,
right?
But I think traditional salespeople see a prospect as just like some rank, could be almost anybody, and I'm going to call them because they fit the suit. Like they might need what I want. So it's a prospective client, and they haven't raised their hand yet. So I think that's part of it's kind of a post-trust marketing flip-flop, I think. But
yeah, and let me jump in here with my guess as to why that is. This thought distracted me for a minute earlier. The thought is this: anytime you find a done-for-you lead generation service, and there's a bunch of them out there. Some of them I think are great, and some are probably not great. But they'll all kind of position themselves as done-for-you lead generation, meaning you pay us a fee per month, or there's some kind of payment structure. It's usually, if they're good, they can deliver results within a month, and so it makes sense for them to bill not on a fixed project basis, but almost like a subscription. And they will deliver to you, leads, right? And what they mean by that is we did something, and as a result of that something, we feel like this person at this company, and here's their contact info and their phone number, and here's all this information about them. We think that they might need your services. Or we actually cold emailed them and we got a response, and now we're handing them off to you to close, have the sales conversation and maybe close the sale. Like all those done for you lead generation services tend to rely upon outbound sales or marketing or outbound activities where they're reaching out. They're maybe building a list and then reaching out and seeing if anybody responds to cold email or cold calling or whatever. And those done-for-you lead generation services tend to use outbound. And then there's a whole other category of done-for-you services that are done-for-you content marketing. And they don't tend to talk about themselves as lead generation services as much as these other outbound-based services do. And this distinction might be just only significant to me because I'm like head deep in this stuff all the time. But I think that's a significant difference, because inbound stuff like, we're going to create great content marketing for you that's really going to demonstrate your expertise or establish you as some kind of expert or thought leader. That is just a less controllable way to generate leads.
Right.
It's less like of a faucet you can grasp and turn the knob on.
Yeah, you're sort of like, it's like more luck based.
It's sort of, yeah. So is my head up my butt, or does that seem like a meaningful difference to you?
No, I do. I think it's really murky, and I think that helps unmurk it a little bit. So what if but I think both of us are getting like into the abstract a little bit here. So if we imagine, the dear listener, and they're like, look, you guys, shut up. I just need more customers, so what does that look like? And I think I accidentally said it earlier to a freelancer who's in a famine phase of a feast famine cycle. They're like, look, I just need to be talking to, it's more conversations. It's like, however they start, whether it's outbound or inbound or, or referrals or whatever. How do I get into more sales conversations? Because that's pretty easy to find. So there's, we could get into like pre-qualification, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. It's like, how do I get on the phone or in person with people who are considering hiring me? So that's, I suppose, whatever definition of a lead and however you generate that, that's the goal. And then it's kind of up to, and this is where I was saying like, this is where to me trust becomes super important, is in the sales conversation, the pricing and sale part. The trust is the most important. It's not the first point where it comes in, but to me, that's where the rubber meets the road with trust.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair way to look at it for sure. I'm always sort of seeking these lead generation techniques that kind of, kickstart that trust building process.
Yeah, me too.
But there's a lot of ways it can happen. And it can happen later in the process. So I love that, the way you phrase that. That kind of clarifies what we should be talking about here. So, we both gave this away. Like I think I suggested a title for the show, and you started riffing on the strategy before tactics thing. And those are both part of the first answer, I think, to your question, which is you have to make a decision about who you're trying to reach, right? That's step one. And that fits under that positioning umbrella. Now, that decision is like, that's the thing I'm super focused on helping people with, is making that decision. And one of the characteristics of that decision is it can feel like a life or death thing for your business. And our businesses are very personal for most of us. So by extension, it feels life and death level decision-making for us as people. And I would submit that it doesn't have to be. Like, you could say, I'm going to make this decision and it's only going to last for 6 months, and it's no one's ever going to know about it, but I'm going to use it to inform how I do lead generation. In other words, I'm going to decide that I'm going to conduct lead generation as if I was trying to become known for writing, Ruby on Rails apps for startups, which, by the way, that's a terrible market position. I don't know why I said that, except it was the first one to come to mind. So you have to decide who you are trying to reach first. And if I was to try to really limit myself, the complexity of my answer, and just make it a not nuanced answer at all, I would just say, that's it. That's the decision right there. And I know you would agree, Jonathan, because you and I have talked about this. It's who are you trying to reach, right? Who are your services for? Who are they best for? What do you think?
Absolutely. And here's the nuance that I don't usually articulate that you just did, which is that you don't have to tell anyone you're doing this. You don't have to change the headlines on your website or whatever. You probably should, but I know that it's panic inducing. It's like me suggesting, hey, how about you get this tattoo on your face? It should say, I help credit unions on your face. That's what the reaction you get is, almost like I suggested getting a tattoo on your face. But so I love what you just said, because the tattoo's on your hip, and it's not even a tattoo. It's a temporary tattoo on your hip. So what that allows you to do is it gives you a way to whittle down all of the possibilities for your lead generation technique. So how am I going to get on the radar of somebody who might want to hire me? It allows you to engage in activities that will, whittle down all of the almost infinite possibilities of what, ways you could spend your time to do marketing, which then people just get paralyzed and do nothing and end up with no business in the famine phase. So if you just said, okay, you know what? I'm going to secretly focus on credit unions. And then you're like, okay. And I picked that because my mom was a credit union president, or I've got some kind of, I've got some sort of unfair advantage with that space, and I know the language, I know where they hang out. Then I'm just going to go start hanging out there. Just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm really smart with mobile. Oh, really? And then before you know it, you start getting into conversations about the thing that you do, but with a very particular group of people. And I think the beauty of that is that it's a virtuous cycle, because then they'll kind of, having conversations with those people is going to give you more information about their language, their specific needs around what you do, so that the overlap in the Venn diagram gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't know, it's just a way to, because you've got limited resources. You don't have a lot of time to engage in activities. So you want marketing activities. So focusing them down, this is like a nice baby step in a sort of non-threatening way to experiment with picking a target market.
Yeah, it's at the risk of taking something that we've made so beautifully simple and making it not beautifully simple anymore. It forces the developers or the outcome focused, or the kind of input focused people in the audience to it's going to feel like tying your dominant arm behind your back. But if you say the only decision you have to make is who you want to focus on serving or who you want your services to be for, then you're automatically de-emphasizing, well, I'm a really great, Rails developer, or I'm the world's best illustrator, jockey, or whatever you think your kind of technical strong suit is. Mm-hmm. That's great. That's going to be an asset at some point, but that doesn't factor into this decision the way we're framing the decision.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the decision, in fact.
Yeah.
So it kind of muddies the water, I know, but it's a sort of judo move to try to get people thinking differently.
Well, here's the thing, right? Because all of a sudden, if you don't pick someone, there's this just anonymous mass of humanity, and what I see people doing is certainly not conscious, but what I see people doing is marketing. Any marketing that they're doing is accidentally to their peer group, because those are the only people they understand. Those are the people that they know how to talk to. Those are the people they feel like they're in a relationship. It's their tribe. It's their group. It's their language. They have this shared view. And so that's why you get web developers speaking at web developer conferences. That's not going to get you business. Mm-hmm. Unless you're selling training or books to web developers. If those are your clients, okay, fine. But if you're a web developer who works with credit unions, you should be speaking at places where credit union people hang out. And I mean, the even bigger picture, you shouldn't be taking all the time and money it takes to go present to your peers. You shouldn't be doing that unless you're, whatever, assuming that you need leads and your business isn't where you want it to be. Do not waste time speaking at conferences to your peers, because that does nothing. Unless you're selling things to them, that does nothing for your business.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the "How did you hear about us" section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the "How did you hear about us" section.
Yeah, I will muddy the waters a little bit by saying people have told me of cases where that does work, but it's best done when you have some kind of specialization that is kind of rare, and it's a way of getting the word out at a technical level. And those people who are sort of in the same ecosystem might be like, oh yeah, I know a person who really specializes on login authentication systems. And
that's true, but I call BS. No, I call BS on that. Sorry. It's true. It can turn into work, but it is absolutely not the best use of your time. Well, I agree with you. That's where I was going, which is sorry.
if you're prioritizing lead generation efforts, that never gets the number one slot. Or if it does, yes. I think you're making a mistake.
Yes, we're in total agreement there, because that is the reason why I was freaking out is because that is a very seductive path for people. They're like, oh yeah, but no, these people work inside of big companies and they're going to recommend. No. And if they do, you're getting recommended by the wrong person. You're getting recommended by your surly engineer buddies to management. And you're going to go in, and then guess what happens? Now you're getting leads, but they see you as a pair of hands, and you can't price yourself in a way that is going to be profitable. So I'm sorry for interrupting like that, but I was like hopping up and down mad on my seat. Like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, the context is what's most critical there. It's like, if you're killing it in getting leads from the most desirable sources, and you have extra sort of margin in your time budget and your money budget to go show up at some conferences for peers, don't let us hold you back from that. But
view it as a luxury, though.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the right way to put it. It's almost like a vacation, like a sort of working vacation or hang out with your buddies kind of vacation.
Right. Yep. And by the way, people who are familiar with my history, I'm totally guilty of this. I spoke.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time doing this kind of thing.
Right. But the only time, yes. And the only time I got great clients out of it was those few conferences that were industry specific, but not to my peers. So
right.
Places
where speaking from experience here.
Yeah. It's like where people with suits are in the audience. So if you're a web person, you don't want to be speaking to people in hoodies. It's like, just a dramatic oversimplification, but if there are no suits in the audience, you've got a problem. If you sell the suits.
Can you go back in time, Jonathan, to what your thinking was like at that time, and why didn't you? I might be a little harsh in the way I say this, but why didn't you get it back then?
That's a good question.
I mean, you made the decision to spend time and energy and money in a way that, I mean, maybe it was just fun, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you secretly have a trust fund. I don't know about that.
No.
Yeah. So this, you did these things at the expense of other things you could have done. Why? And I'm really not trying to be critical or throw you under the bus here, but like we've all gone through that stage where we kind of didn't get it. Right. So.
No, that's a great question. So I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to tell the story. So like the first conference I spoke at was one that I had attended many times. And the one thing I knew was I needed to be more famous in order to I saw becoming more famous was the way to differentiate myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, be the first person somebody thought of when they thought of people in this community. And I knew that you could do that by writing books, and I knew you could do that by speaking at the one annual conference, because I had, my mentor, basically my last boss, in fact, did this, and it was like magic. The results were like magic. The phone would just ring. Customers would be like, "Can we work with you, please?" So I was like, okay. I just took that playbook and I said, speak at conferences and write books. And it totally worked. I didn't have any idea I was just copying him, though. I didn't know what I was doing. And there was only one conference, period. So
interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly, well, to repeat the word you just said, the conference, because there was only one, there were suits there. So my customers were there. And that's just dumb luck. If there were lots of them, and later when I went into web stuff, no customers were there at like a lot of the web stuff. It was all like web designer, front-end designers, front-end developers, web designers, full stack developers, DevOps people in more recent years. None of those people were going to buy from me directly. And if by some magic occurrence, their boss said, "Hey, do you know anybody who would be like great at, whatever thing I do?" The odds of that are so incredibly low. And I think it's never happened. I'm pretty sure it's never happened. So the biggest customers I've ever had came from me just being on the speaking circuit and accidentally getting invited to speak at stuff that was a little bit outside of my peer group, that appealed to people a little bit outside of my peer group. And then like, boom, $100,000 gig, boom, $120,000 gig. And it was like, whoa.
I can so see myself in that same story. And that, like, I'm imagining it as you're telling it. I'm imagining myself being there. And wasn't there a Black Mirror episode where there was some technology implant that prevented people from seeing things that were like distressing to them?
I didn't
emotionally distressing.
Maybe.
I actually don't watch the show, but I heard about this somewhere on, some news site.
Yeah.
Basically, it would like interfere with your ability to see it. And so it kind of fuzz it out, like the way that, certain things are fuzzed out on television when they're deemed offensive.
Right.
I imagine myself being there and like all the suit people getting fuzzed out. And so I could only see my peers. And I felt like, oh, I just killed it. That's why I got all that work is, I just was so amazing at being this expert for my peers and not even realizing where the leads came from.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that was actually your experience or not. That's probably how it would have been for me.
Right. Well, so in my reality, an actual person in an actual suit would come running up to me afterwards and being like, "We have to talk." So it's like, I keep saying suits, but it's literal for me. It was, and it's probably less true now than it was, I'm talking about, I don't know what years, I don't even know what years, like 5-10 years ago. It's, I think, decreasing. Well, I don't know. I haven't been to a conference in a long time. I stopped doing them. So anyway, I suppose how does this tie back though? I guess it's about like realizing who your audience is before you try to speak with them, I guess, is kind of what we're saying.
Well, I think there's another big takeaway, which is that I know this was very true of me. I was very not comfortable around the people who had the authority to hire me. I was just like, I'm naturally introverted, and I'm much more comfortable around those people now. But it's also part of the reason why my business focuses on, individuals and very small businesses is who I'm here to serve, and self-employed software developers on top of that. But anyway, I was never really comfortable around those people, and I think that might be a pretty common thing. Is you can just see it in my language, those people, right? It's like I'm making them the other. And that can really, I think, sabotage lead generation, because it may be that you really do need to connect with and build trust with people that you never hang out with in real life, because you think of them as, suits, or you think of them as the managers who just don't get it or whatever. And I just want to bring that up because I think that's a small facet of your story, Jonathan, is I bet you're a lot more comfortable around those people now. But back then you probably were less, or if you weren't, you just had a sort of unconscious bias that they weren't people you wanted to hang out with. And that can really affect your lead generation.
Sure. Well, here's the funny thing, because that we're kind of like a lot of the tactical things that I've done over the years, and even some of the kind of sound bites that I'll constantly be repeating to try and get people to be more empathetic to their potential clients and people they can help. One of the things that this conversation around the others, like them, the pointy-haired boss, is I have an antidote for that, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing until just now, which is that I've said repeatedly for years, only work with people who you like.
Right.
Is because there are pointy-haired there's suits out there that you like. There's suits out there that, that are just like me in their personal life, in their political life. They have a different kind of job than me, but they play guitar, they do martial arts, they have a couple kids, they understand all those things. And I totally dig that person, that individual, that human. They have a job that I would never have picked in a million years. They've got their reasons. Who knows? But finding that intersection, this is another good reason to always be yourself. I think it makes no sense to put on airs and pretend you're more professional than you are. There are roles in your life, like, I don't swear around kids and stuff like that, but or on podcasts, for example, but more or less, just be yourself. Don't try and be like, oh, I'm going to gesticulate less in this meeting because it's unprofessional. I mean, come on.
Right.
It's going to accidentally come out. You're just going to look uncomfortable. So just be yourself, work with people that you like, but be honest about who it is that you can actually help the most. And if you're going to put a price tag on stuff and you're not happy with the income that you've been getting, you need to help people who get more value out of what you do than the people you've been working with. So find people who have control of larger budgets, or they've got a bigger opportunity they're trying to capture, or whatever it is, and find people in there that psychographically match you, but perhaps, and maybe demographically too, I guess it doesn't matter as much, but, perhaps demographically and psychographically match you, but happen to be, in control, a CMO at a Fortune 500 company. And see, like, okay, if I was going to help people like me, people that I like, that happen to be in that role, how would I talk to them? I would talk to them just like I talk to my friend who happens to be the CMO of a Fortune 500 company, because that's the way I relate to people. And I don't know, I would just be like, look, Fortune 500 people, I think it's crazy that, well, I'll use credit unions because that's the actual real life example. I think it's crazy that you have branches. Like, can you explain to me why you have branches? And it comes across, and if you imagine that they're your friends over dinner having drinks, and you just ask these innocent questions, I think it's a little bit less threatening, but at the same time, completely iconoclastic. So I guess we're getting a little off track. I'm getting into like, how do you, the thing that I think is related is, Philip, how would you define a target market?
Well, so I'm sitting here kind of rubbing my hands gleefully because everything we're saying is making this point. A lot of it indirectly is making this point that it's all about who you're going to focus on. And I am going to add another little bit of nuance to that based on your last question about how do you define your target market. This is one of two ways. I call it, find your people. And that's a sort of, breezy way of saying, just find the people you dig, that you resonate with, or you feel some connection with, or some values with. And it may be them as specific individuals, which is kind of how you're framing it to an extent.
Yeah, because you want to avoid the find your people. Well, my people are web developers. I'm a web developer, other web developers.
Right.
You want to avoid that.
Right. And there's a chance, I think, for a lot of people that, okay, in any large enough group of people, there's going to be people you just can't stand. And that's not a reason to avoid this approach to choosing a market. Because it might be like, well, I really want to, see the environment protected. And that's a very strong feeling for me. You may say to yourself, I want to protect the environment. And so your people might be businesses that also have that as their chief value or their chief goal for the business. Mm-hmm. And that would be an example, I think, of finding your people. Like you kind of just feel this common cause with what they're doing. Or you just might think, athletic achievement is amazing. And so you're not a professional athlete, but you want to work around people who are in that endeavor, right? So that would be another way to do it. So just generally, it's finding people that you feel some kind of connection with on the level of interest or values, or you just feel emotionally. It really is an emotional thing, honestly. And there's no shame in that because, as we all know from research, that's how we make decisions. And then we backfill with logic. So there's no shame in saying, well, I just like these people. That's going to be the most important strategic decision you make. That's what makes it kind of weird. Is positioning is the most important strategic decision you can make for any business, and to make that on the basis of how you feel, to a lot of us, feels strange. And I'm here to tell you, there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, that might be the best thing you could do, because if your emotions are fighting you, there's this other. It's a kind of made up personality type. I just call it the mercenary type, where the mercenary type can put up with a lot of crap if there's a payday in it for them. Mm-hmm. And if you really are that type, then that may not be the best way to choose your target market. You might be looking for some kind of hole in the market or some sort of strategic advantage that you have based on previous client work you've done. You've got a real strong track record. Mm-hmm. And I call that approach find your head start. And for some people, that's the right way to do it. I could just go into a whole multi-hour lecture on this stuff, and I'm resisting doing that. But I just want to say, just to add that, you asked the question, Jonathan, how do you find your target market? Those are the two basic ways. Mm-hmm. Find your people or find your head start. Yeah,
and the mercenary thing and the hourly billing thing ties into the word, it's like comes together in the word freelance, which originally meant available weapon. Mm-hmm. And they didn't care whose side of the war they were fighting on, as long as they got paid. It wasn't about the mission. It wasn't about that. So I think that word is not accidental. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, I need a pair of hands. Come and do what I tell you.
You need a hired gun is maybe a more recognizable modern version of that same idea that you just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Right. You don't really care about the outcome. You just want the money. And that mindset is the one I'm trying to change, or is one that needs to be changed in order to get away from the concept of hourly billing, the sort of defense of like, well, I put my time in, I should get paid. And it's like, well, you didn't deliver any results, you shouldn't get paid. So like that right there is a critical mind shift for getting I think you need to get, normally I'm like, you need to get over that before you can actually increase your income or your profitability in any meaningful way. Yeah, you can raise your hourly rates, but that only goes so far. But now I'm seeing, like, in the context of this conversation, you probably can't pick a target market until you get over that that like hurdle, because you're like, I don't care. I can do this for everyone. I can do this for anybody. I'm like, really? Could you do it for a terrorist, or could you do it for like some other, like distasteful scum of the earth? I'm not saying, well, I don't know. I feel like I'm on, but like, you wouldn't just work for anybody, dear listener. I'm sure there are people that you would refuse to work with. Just like broaden that group. I refuse to work with dentists. I refuse to work with financial analysts. I refuse to work with and get it down to your people. I love the find your people thing. I love that. I haven't heard you say that before. Find your people, and it's probably 10 million. There are probably 10 million people in that group of your people, however you define your people, and find the ones that have huge budgets and see how you can help them and deliver massive value and set your prices in a way that's equitable to both of you. And for what's a good deal to them and a good deal for you, you're both highly profitable.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think the mercenary approach can work in some situations, but if we challenged ourselves to leave listeners with one mechanism that probably works for most people, it really is the find your people approach. Again, find your head start can work in certain situations. I agree with you that it makes it harder to do value building because you're more focused on. It's tempting to focus on the technology. Like most people that I work with feel like their head start is their knowledge of a particular technology. And sometimes it is. And sometimes you can translate that into a good market position and then combine what you're talking about, Jonathan, that empathy for the people you serve, so that you're in the right, all the incentives are aligned to do value billing. I think that's one takeaway from what you're saying. It's harder with that mercenary approach to make all those other elements line up. But I do think from a positioning perspective, it can work. It's just probably, I'm still kind of figuring out, this is a new way for me of really thinking about the start of the process. These two approaches to making the decision, the find your people versus find your head start. And so I don't have a lot of data yet on how well that works 2-3 years down the road. But it's a way to frame the decision for you so that you're hopefully not focusing on the wrong things. As we get to the end of this episode, I think we kind of have to throw up our hands on lead generation. That, like, I mean, maybe was secretly hoping we wouldn't talk about it because it doesn't matter until you make this decision.
Right. There's no way. You just like, farting in the wind. It's like, what are you going? How could you possibly decide what to do for lead generation before narrowing down your focus to something manageable? It's like, I know people do it all the time though, because they're scrambling and they're looking for anything to get relief from this pain of not knowing how they're going to pay their bills next month. And they are desperate for any kind of solution. And so, whatever the next blog post about landing clients is that comes across the transom, I'm going to do that. And it doesn't work. I'm going to try this. And it doesn't work.
You'll try it because it's novel and you don't have any evidence that it won't work for you. You'll have some evidence that things you have tried are largely ineffective. I know there's going to be edge cases. There's going to be situations where, I've talked to an agency years ago who wrote a single blog post on migrating from one version of PHP to the next version. And they got work for that for like years afterwards. And that's wonderful. Like I'm not emotionally, I don't care, but it's atypical for that to happen. So let's say that you also wrote a blog post on how to migrate from PHP, whatever, to the next version, and it did nothing for you. It's very likely that you will sour on that lead generation approach, which is one of dozens, maybe hundreds, right? I mean, if you get real granular with how you look at lead generation, you could probably come up with well over 100 ways to generate leads. In fact, I've seen blog posts that are just that. They're like a sort of rundown of all these different lead gen techniques. And so you move on to the next one and you'll have hope, right? You'll be like, well, I haven't tried this one. Maybe this is a missing piece. And then the lead generation stuff is not the missing piece. The strategy is the missing piece. The deciding is the missing piece.
Yeah. it's like how, it's like this kite blowing around in the ground, and you're like, why won't this thing fly? It's like, well, you're not holding the string. Like, like nothing you do is going to make that kite fly unless you grab the string, pull it, and then you've got a chance. But it's just like watching someone in a park kicking the thing. How come this won't fly? Kite. Yeah. How should I kick it now? Or what should I? Maybe if I throw it in the air like this, it'll fly. So grab the string. So there's anyway. Yeah.
I suspect you and I have both been there. Like I know I've been there, and so I hope this doesn't come across to the folks at home as like, haha, you silly people who haven't figured it out. That's not it at all. It's just, Blair Enns talks about work not done yet. That's a phrase that he uses all the time. And that's a sort of category of stuff where it's a real problem for the business owner, but the solution is not outside of them. The solution is in the business owner, and the solution is we'll do that work, and then that problem will be solved. But you've got to solve this other problem that's underlying.
Yeah. Right. So positioning before lead generation, we're both for it.
I'd give that a thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, exactly.
2 thumbs up from the panel.
Yep. Well, I'd say we've covered a lot of angles of that. That's one of my main things I'm trying to do is help people figure that out and make that transition out of being a generalist into specializing so they can solve that. So I could talk a lot longer about it, but I think we have covered a lot of the bases on that.
Well, we should switch over to picks, but it's great to have you back. Glad to have you back on the show.
Yeah, good to be back.
Any picks this week? Have you been saving them up?
For you, the listeners of Freelancers Show, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
If only I was so disciplined. I do have some, though. Let me focus on 2 this week. I'll save some of the rest for later. So you, Jonathan, pointed me to this guy, Chris Voss, who wrote a book called Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. And I read the book and thought it was great. It fits in a category of books on negotiation. And the more I read about this stuff, the more I realize there's kind of 2 competing camps in that world. There's this, I don't even know what to label them as, but there's a certain camp that is focused very much on a process, almost like you could do a decision tree for a negotiation. And I should say this is relevant to everybody. Everybody negotiates, whether you think you do or not. When you work with somebody else to arrive at a decision, you're negotiating. So there's that kind of, formal camp for negotiation. I've never really been drawn to that, but I've come across some books. This is one of them. That is this other camp, which is more about empathy. It's more about communication. And that just resonates deeply with me. And so Jim Camp's books fit in that category for me. They're not perfect. Neither is this Chris Voss book called Never Split the Difference, but they're all, I think, contributing to this kind of idea that you can have a very empathetic conversation with someone and resolve some of the most tremendously difficult problems there are. And so the Chris Voss book is super interesting. He has a background as a FBI hostage negotiator, which if that doesn't make for some interesting war stories, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Before that, he worked on a suicide hotline.
Yeah.
This guy's the real deal.
Yeah. And so thank you, Jonathan, for that recommendation. The book just really landed for me. and I'm definitely going to read it again. So I'll link to that in the show notes. That's Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It, a book by Chris Voss, and it's available in all different formats on Amazon. And I just want to point out for my second pick what our mutual colleague Nick DeSabato is doing. He's launching currently a new book on what he calls value-based design. And I haven't read the book, like I haven't had any kind of early access to that, which is fine. But just knowing Nick, it's going to be good because he thinks about the discipline of design from this very business-centric, value-centric perspective. And I know that the designers out there probably are constantly frustrated with us because none of us is a designer. And that world is so confused with like, well, is design really about business value or is it about these other things? So I'll link to that as well. I don't have a easy to remember URL to verbalize for you, but I know that book's going to be worth your attention if that stuff seems relevant to you. So those are my picks for this week.
Check out that Positioning and Trust Transfer. I haven't read it yet, but I know it's going to be good.
Yeah, seriously.
Right? Yeah, he just does good stuff. I will. So I'm going to pile on. I had actually other picks, but I'm going to pile on the ones that you just shared. Another great negotiating book is called Getting More: How to Negotiate to Achieve Your Goals in the Real World by Stuart Diamond. And I listened to the audiobook. It's absolutely amazing. And it gives lots of really specific, actionable tips. He tells lots of stories. It really sinks in and you're like, wow, this makes perfect sense. And I never do it like this. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was one of those books that I think seeped into me so thoroughly that I'll bet you if I went back and listened to it or read it again, I'd be like, oh, that's why I think that. It just went straight into my subconscious. Really, really good. And it's very much about putting yourself in the shoes of the other party, very empathetic. It tracks with the way I view the world. Really good. The other thing I'll mention, speaking of Nick D, I think almost a year ago, I recorded an interview with him about practicing value-based design for Ditching Hourly, one of my other shows. So he is releasing this book. It's, I think, available for pre-order now. But I never got around to editing that episode, much to my eternal shame. So I'm going to put that together and release it. So by the time you hear this, dear listener, you should be able to go to ditchinghourly.com and hear Nick talk for probably 45 minutes about what I'm sure are the theories behind and the practices behind what are in his new book. So check that out at ditchinghourly.com. And that'll do it for this week. Thanks for listening to us here on the Freelancers Show, and we hope you join us again next week. Get close to 300. Ooh, scary.
All right, folks.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.